Hello and welcome to Your Individual Wedding, the wedding podcast that helps you feel seen and celebrated as you plan a day as unique as you are.
Welcome to this episode of Your Individual Wedding Podcast, where today we're talking to recently married couple Eddie and Ellie. So full disclosure, I'm a really good friend of Eddie and Ellie's. I was a guest at their recent wedding and my husband was their best man. So we got that out of the way. For reasons that will become apparent as we get into the conversation, Eddie and Ellie's wedding had a number of incredibly personal and unique elements to it that I know will stay with me forever. But first things first, we love a love story. So starting with you, Ellie, would you mind sharing with us how you actually first met Eddie?
Oh, gosh. I'll probably have to keep it to the brief version because we haven't got all day. But eHarmony it was.
Oh, wow.
And I think you hadn't actually signed up on purpose. Actually, you'd reactivated an old profile from 10 years previously. And I just signed up. I was in a similar situation to the one I'm in tonight, except that I was always crying and there wasn't a man on my at the side of me, but I'd had a few glasses of wine. And my boys just kept saying, you have to date. We're tired of you crying, because my husband had died about 18 months before. And in the intervening 18 months, he died from cancer. I got cancer. I was diagnosed with cancer 4 months after he died. So I went through all the, 3 different surgeries, chemo, radiotherapy, and all this kind of thing with twin boys who, by the time we met, they were 12, weren't they?
So.
Yeah,
I was 12.
Pain in the arse. They were just at that lovely age. They're still at a lovely age. They're all at a lovely age. When does it stop? They just said, Mum, we want you to meet somebody. We're tired of hearing you crying all the time. So I reluctantly signed up after a glass or 2 of wine, and decided to sign up in a very honest way, because I didn't really want to be. I didn't know what dating websites were like. So I thought, well, I'll just be myself and I'll be honest. And it said, what are you looking for in a man? And I put something like, well, I've got a few shelves that need putting up, and, and they said, how do you spend your free time? And I believe, like, refereeing fights between twin boys. And I didn't say, oh, I love running and cycling and going out with my friends. And I suppose my profile was a little bit different because I'd picked a picture of myself staring at the family dog. And anyway, Ed wasn't a dog man, so he would have swiped had it not been for the fact that I saw this guy who looked very attractive, but kind of nice, as in I wasn't necessarily immediately like, wow, I've got to meet him. It was like, oh, he doesn't look mental and he only lives like 12 miles up the road, so I'll give him a
What a
call.
compliment. Eddie, you feeling really special at this moment?
Yes, I've heard this before, so I know how desperate she was. Yeah, so she's right. So so I had reactivated an old dating profile, because this is not the first time. That is my third wife, so I've been through the dating before. And I never thought much of eHarmony when I was younger. The first time I did it. So I reactivated it, and then I went on holiday. I went to France or Switzerland.
You didn't go on holiday?
Well, I went on an ultra running week.
Wow.
I was doing marathons every day in the Alps, and at the end of the second day, this message came through from eHarmony, which what was eHarmony? I don't remember logging into that. So anyway, it came up, and it was Ellie saying, "You don't look mad, and you live up the road. So can you give me some advice? I'm running a marathon. Can you give me some advice?"
No, I just said, what's dating? I just wanted to know what dating was like, because you just look like a friendly guy, and so I wasn't remotely interested in a relationship, really. I just thought it'd be interesting to have a chat with somebody that isn't mental. So that was all it was, really.
It was, and you'd said that I didn't look mad, but I thought a witty reply, which is, well, I might not look mad, but I've just run 2 marathons and I've got another 2 tomorrow. That was it. Without, her profile photo was you squinting at a Dalmatian, rather than the standard tits out style.
I just didn't know what to do.
Most of it I thought that I was looking for.
So he was looking for a blonde with big boobs.
I got that wrong, because when I met Ellie, she had no hair, and a recent mastectomy. So
Yeah.
it was
Bald from chemo and one boob, so
Yeah.
it wasn't quite the look you were going for.
it wasn't. Then you realise that you fall in love with personality rather than looks, and the looks come later. And they did.
Oh,
It took me 50 years to realise that, but
Oh, so how did it get from that point to deciding you were going to get married? Was that something you both knew you wanted to do again?
Quite a long road. Well, I mean, once we'd established that Ed was not 43, as it said on his profile, and
it was an old profile. Quite so honest in my 30s.
In fairness, he did tell me quite soon after it was one of those where
After you told me
we
he had
did
only
start-
one boob and no hair.
Well,
that
I'm not
was
sure.
when we started
I
complete.
can't remember which confession came first. It might have been that
There's a
I'm not
series of
actually
confessions.
43. Anyway, it was we worked out very quickly. It was just a click, wasn't it? We just couldn't stop messaging each other, and it was lovely. So we from that day forth, we've messaged each other every day, over and over again. Ed works in London half the week, so we message when you're there, and it's just, I mean, the wedding thing didn't come.
Well, I was a little bit reluctant.
Reticent.
I think my relationship with marriage was not quite the same as yours. When
No.
you were married to Phil, you were married within months of meeting him, whereas
which is not something I'd recommend necessarily.
No,
I don't think, I look back on that now and think that was a bit quick, but you were the other way around.
it was quite quick.
Yeah.
Well, my marriage had not worked out so well for me. I'd been married twice before, and they'd not played out very well at all. So I was, and I had 3 children, and Ellie had 2, and I was of the opinion that 5 is probably sufficient. And so I wasn't necessarily in a rush.
One was sufficient, actually.
One
when
probably was.
circumstances occurred.
So yeah, I wasn't in a rush to get married, and I didn't really see the point in many ways. But I knew that Ellie had a different opinion and a different experience of marriage. So thought, well,
I think it's a different one for a woman, especially for a widow, because you carry your late husband's name. So for me, that has always been a bit of a burden. But at the same time, I would never have wanted to marry you. I know that you've in the past you felt compelled to get married because they wanted children or whatever. So coming back to the children, we were never going to have children, so it didn't necessarily matter so much about getting married. But I don't know, there was no real reason to do it. But at the same time, I think that in the end, I don't know what made you change your mind.
Well, I knew I wanted to be with you forever, and then I knew that marriage was very important to you, and I wanted to declare that commitment. Although the institution of marriage wasn't something that was quite so sacrosanct for me. I knew that I wanted you to be, my wife and with me forever. So
it's always been
it's more about that. It was a declaration of love, rather than the traditional process of getting married, having children, etc. Which
so it wasn't so much as a sort of this is what is traditionally done in a way. If you want to start a family together, then traditionally you get married first and then you start a family. So for you guys, I'm hearing that this was more about a celebration of the two of you being together. Is that right? Am I on the right track?
Yeah. I would say so, because nothing was really going to change, and I think that both of us knew that in marriage things don't, if you get married to change something or to make something better, it's not going to happen. So marriage doesn't change anything, and that's a really important lesson I would say to anybody that was planning to get married. If things are wrong, don't do it, because they're not going to get better. But if they're right, just carry on as you are. And in fact, in a way, we really got married to each other's children, which sounds a bit weird, but that was the commitment that we wanted to make to our own kids, which was that we're not just committing to each other, we're committing to you guys to make sure that that you are now siblings in your own funny little way. And this is going to be forever. And I think that was just as important to us to commit to them as it was to commit to each other.
Yeah.
So was there a proposal?
Oh yes, it was quite romantic.
Are you willing to share?
Well, we went to Dubrovnik, didn't we, for a dirty week? No, it was a dirty week. Was it a week?
33 days.
33 days. And but it was at the end. It was about a year ago, wasn't it? And it was sort of second week in October when the place sort of shut down. We got to the hotel, and it had a nice balcony, a lovely sea view. I mean,
And it was
such
actually
a beautiful
overlooking the Dalmatian coast.
Oh, it was, yeah.
And the Dalmatian it was the family dog, Brian.
Yeah, and
I think that one of the reasons we went there was because just after Phil, my husband, died, I went there with the boys, knowing that I'd just been diagnosed with breast cancer, and it was their first holiday without their dad, and the first holiday that we'd had as a threesome. And I had this horrendous news that I knew I needed to impart, but at the same time I thought they've got to have a nice holiday. They've been looking forward to this because one of the things they used to say to me when Phil was ill was, oh, we're never going to be able to go on holiday again, because going on holiday was a big thing that we did as a family. It was our time to escape from working from home, and it was the time that we got together to really switch off and just be together. So they were so worried that they wouldn't have a nice holiday ever again. But I think it was probably just a few days after the funeral, I booked this holiday to Dubrovnik, or we booked it together, and we went and we had a lovely time, apart from the fact that I was holding this thing in. And so it was great they had a nice time, but I was struggling with it quite a lot. And I remember thinking what a beautiful romantic place it was, and wouldn't it be lovely to come back one day with somebody that I was in love with. And I mentioned that to you a few months before, and then we just said, well, why don't we go to Dubrovnik? But there was no kind of, oh, let's get engaged while we're there, we just went. But I think that the whole well, you'd planned to do it somewhere else, hadn't you?
Well, I'd planned to do it in Dubrovnik, but I'd planned to do it a few days later. In Dubrovnik, there's a cable car that takes you up to the top of the mountain, and a restaurant that overlooks the harbour and town. The old town. That's right. Beautiful. And I thought, I don't want to do it there. That sounds romantic. But when we got there, I checked the weather forecast. I realised that it was very likely to be pissing down all week, and it was indeed pretty much every day, apart from the evening that we arrived. So I looked out on this balcony, and it really was a lovely view. The sun was setting. There were little islands, and so I thought, just get it over with. Let's do it here. So she came out on the balcony, and I dropped onto one knee, and I said, would you marry me? And she laughed. That was her reaction. She laughed at me. She said, I've got a ring and everything, I'm actually quite serious. I did, yeah. This ring, by the way, I'd modelled it on a ring I'd found in a tray in your dressing room. And it turned out I'd modelled it on the size of her late husband.
It was his wedding ring.
Too large for Ellie's dainty fingers. So
I couldn't wear it.
Despite that, she said yes.
Oh wow!
Oh wow!
Oh, I love the whole against all odds feeling that's running through this story.
I don't know whether it's against all odds or everything that we've done has been a bit like, oh, fuck it. Let's just do it now.
The day that we were meant to be going up to this restaurant, it pissed it down. We got up there on the cable car, but we couldn't even eat in the restaurant because the storm had come in, and we got the last cable car down. So it would have been a bit of a disastrous.
Well, not only that, but it turns out it was the date of your previous wedding.
So I hadn't told you.
Oh,
wow. Oh my God.
I can't remember how I think it was because we knew that it'd been October and it was when we were starting to think about a wedding date. I had to go through, I think it was your mum's Facebook that I went through to find out when your last wedding was. And then I was like, oh my God, it could have been that you'd proposed to me. And not that it would have bothered me at all, but it was quite funny, really. That
running
you just
out
had
of dates now.
Yeah.
We're just going to have to stop now, I think. This will have to be the last wedding that you have.
So you mentioned that a big part of getting married was for the children, really. Did you encounter any challenges in planning the wedding in relation to having a blended family and incorporating all of that into your wedding?
Not really.
Well, it couldn't have been on one of their birthdays, so clearly you have to navigate a selection of different dates. But outside of that, not really. No. I mean, certainly how we choreograph the day and some of the elements of the ceremony, clearly that was, mindful of the fact that we have got a blended family, and a lot of what we said in the ceremony itself was partly aimed at the children. It was the children needed to hear it and understand that we this union is not just Ellie and myself. This is,
so we rewrote the vows, didn't we, to include all their names in the vows.
But in terms of the planning, I wouldn't say, it certainly wasn't burdensome because we had children. It was just something that we needed.
I think we basically just told them you're not involved, because they're quite big personalities, the three teenagers, and it would have been like, oh, can we? And every now and again we did get, oh, I think we should do this and you should do that, and we were like, no, it's our wedding.
And inviting people.
Oh yeah.
So they'd say, oh, can Sally come? Sally's come.
But like literally in front of Sally at a family meal.
To be hen party.
And actually Sally's adorable, but we kind of had to decide, like, we're not having uncles because that's too many people. So we literally had our own siblings and their children if they were under 18. Yeah. And that was it. So no uncles. So to kind of, but it's just etiquette, I think, that the kids didn't, like Layla, she's too young to know that you don't just sit there in a family meal and ask outright, can this person come to your wedding? But she didn't know. No. My boys were exactly the same. They were like, oh, I really think you should invite so and so. And well, I haven't really seen that.
So our biggest challenge as we started our preparations was the guest list. That was our biggest. It caused the most upset, and we didn't really row about it, but it was what we found the most difficult, and you especially, actually. And I think, if I were to give anybody guidance about those first few steps of planning a wedding, is work out how many people you want there, because the size of your guest lists actually determines the type of wedding that it's going to be. And we made the decision, we wanted it reasonably intimate. We didn't want it too big, but we clearly wanted a representative number of people who were important in our life, and we landed on that as our design principle.
Well, what we decided on was people that were part of our story.
Yeah.
So if people hadn't actually met us for whatever reason, and that was, in some ways, that was quite easy because of lockdown. So we've been together 5 years, and lockdown has been at least 2 of them. So there were people that I've got friends that I'm really quite close to, but they've not met Ed yet because of they live down south or the Isle of Man or places like that, and it's like, well, it's easier then for me to say, well, if you've not met him or you've only met him very briefly, then you're not really part of our story. But that was quite heartbreaking not to invite people, especially if they're like your children's godparents. But you're kind of like, well, where would they fit into this particular party? So everybody that was there had played a role in our being together, like the couple that you were running through the Alps with, who are still dear friends of yours. They were there when my message popped up, and we're in the exec lounge at Geneva Airport when you were emailing, messaging me furiously and stuff like that. Hours, and asking you questions and all this. So they were there. They were part of our story.
I suppose in a way that the fact that you both had quite extensive lives before meeting each other, in as much as previous marriages, children from those marriages, and all the associated family members from your marriages, and those children's uncles, aunties, cousins, straight away, even if you just invited family members, that's a lot of people. So I suppose in many ways that possibly is the biggest challenge of planning a wedding when you have blended families, is the sheer logistics of
definitely
who gets invited. Like you say,
because we probably had about 30 people at least that were just family, close family, as in siblings or children. Parents. I've got 4 parents because my parents are divorced and have been for years. And
the reality is, we really, I hope they're not listening, but the reality, we only wanted our friends to come. The parents were there because it had to be.
Oh no, that's not true.
At the top of our list was our mates. We want a party.
We did want a party, and actually, do you know that the number of people I spoke to that said that they regretted having a big wedding. You know, I remember speaking to a friend of mine, Debbie, who we went on a dog walk. She lives locally. She's a friend of mine from work, but she's not as in we do the same job, but she's not somebody that, I mean, she wasn't on the original guest list, partly because I've not known her for very long, and again, we've not socialized with her that much. And I remember going for a dog walk with her once, and she said, oh, you know, I really regret having like 120 people at the day do and then another 50 people. She said, just keep it small. So I thought, oh, well, all right, that's a good idea. And then so we kept our guest list small, and then about 5 weeks before the wedding, our DJ cancelled on us. Debbie is a DJ. And so I texted her to say, you know, is there anybody that you know locally, because obviously radio at the moment is people are out of work left, right and centre, so I thought maybe she would know somebody that would be happy to take the gig. And she said, no, I'll do it with Steph, who's another good friend of ours. And in the end, that was amazing, because they were friends, and they are friends, but they came and shared our day, but they also did the a really important job. But the interesting thing was, it was people like her that were saying, do not have a big wedding, just keep it small. And I'm really glad that we did, because the people that came, we really bonded with each other, and they're all friends. You know, I can see them all interacting with each other on Facebook now, and it's lovely. And the day before, we had a social where we all went for a big walk and pub crawl, and ended up in the village hall having pie and peas and lasagna and whatever.
That's a formula
and
for
that
wedding.
worked really well.
Always advocate to anybody the wedding weekend rather than a separate hen and this is the wine I've been drinking, stag hen, and then a few weeks later the wedding. What we did was combine it, so that partly because logistical reasons, you know, people are going to fly in from, you know, London, Barcelona, wherever, rather than then having to come back a few weeks later for the big day, then you combine it. And, you know, a lot of people said, you're mad having the stag and hen was the night before, so I think you can't really go crazy. But
actually,
I'm in my 50s. I'm not going to go totally crazy. This is not going to be, you know, totally debauched. So we combined it. But the thing that makes it so special is that when you go into the ceremony on the wedding day, you have a much more intimate experience, because everybody in that ceremony is familiar with each other.
And they've got memories of what they got up to last night, and they had a great time. They were doing tequila slammers at midnight.
Whereas quite often when you go to some weddings where you start off with the ceremony, and quite often you start off in a church and everybody is sober, they're on their best behavior, they're in their best clothes, and they don't really know anyone. And so it's quite stiff.
Pissed before we started, didn't we? We had a cocktail reception
an hour before. We got more pissed before they walked in. I've always thought that list, it just makes it just more of a sort of it's more than just intimate. It's just you're with friends, and you know
you're sharing an experience together.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think we made our wedding day like the ceremony a bit of an experience.
Well, yes, we may come on to this, but our ceremony was we had the luxury of being able to write our own ceremony, because we haven't actually disclosed this to anybody.
We've not told anyone.
That's show it's a secret. So our ceremony was not the official legal marriage ceremony. We haven't even told our children this yet.
We're going to have to before this comes out.
About 3 months earlier, we did the legal bit, and we effectively eloped and went to a place in Yorkshire. To a register office. People came to the hotel. It was beautiful.
At Bolton Abbey. So it was in Yorkshire, but the place was Bolton Abbey. So
but it was just the two of us. So the witness was some guy from the kitchen. He was on his phone. But it was otherwise still private room, a beautiful ceremony. So so we had that. And so we got legally married. So what that meant is that the ceremony at the venue we were at could be scripted by us, and that allowed us to write in the bits about our children.
But actually we wrote them in at the Devonshire as well. We did write them in, because we wanted to make sure the children, even though they weren't there, we mentioned the children's names. We put the children's names into our vows, because we wanted to, but that's just between us.
You guys said when I asked about the blended family, you said, like, you know, the kids, you know, they were there, blah blah blah. But one of the things that really touched me about your ceremony and your day was how involved your older children were. You know, they stood up and they gave very, very heartfelt speeches about how they felt about the two of you being together, families coming together. And I to this day, I don't know if they were scripted or not, but the speeches they gave were amazing.
Well, we thought so too, and I'm glad that you've said that, because they did go a little bit off script. So the ceremony itself was very scripted, because there was a lot going on from the entrance music to something that happened later, which we'll probably go into. But yes, there was a piece in the ceremony itself where we'd asked our children. We actually wanted all 5 of them to say something, but the little ones were a bit nervous.
Yeah.
And the brief was, say something that you mean, and maybe a nice poem or something that tells everybody how you feel about being part of this large blended family. But we said, write it down, but run it past us, because my mum's in the audience. And she's 79 and easily offended. And so they did. So they showed us each of the 3. They wrote it themselves.
Yeah, and we were a bit like, oh my God, I didn't realise you felt that way.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful.
But it was very sweet, actually, because my boys both mentioned their dad, didn't they? But in a very nice kind of positive way that didn't put any shine on him as such. But they were kind of like, we're sad that my dad died, but what a great person Ed is, and how lucky we are to have kind of lost our dad, but we've got all these children, and you know, we've got a great family. And so it was a nice way of honoring that, because I know that one of the boys, Ben, was quite worried about, I don't want this to be the end of my dad. I don't want to you know,
don't want to draw a line.
Yeah, and so we were quite conscious of the fact that it was, and I feel a bit sorry, actually, in some ways for Ed's kids, because it's very easy to stand up at a wedding and say, oh, you know, these boys' dad, he was a great guy, you know, let's all, and we didn't do a toast to him or anything like that, but you know, he was definitely mentioned with real fondness, whereas the mothers of Ed's 3 children didn't get the same kind of honoring. But not, I mean, no one said anything against them either, but it was kind of like, I just felt a little bit, oh, that must have been a bit hard to
well, you don't need to, because I think it was very well balanced, but
yeah. I think you kind of had to, you know, we had to mention Phil simply because he died, whereas in some ways your ex-wives are perfectly capable of speaking.
Well, you mentioned it,
and
so in your speech you said, look, you know, thank you to the boys' mothers for being so great, because the relationship is very warm.
It is,
and they're very accommodating.
They don't have any envy towards me or any nastiness at all. It's a really amicable kind of relationship. So yeah, I think it was really, really important to me that I mentioned that and thanked them, even though they clearly weren't there.
So the little ones got picked up, and we could have asked their mum to come and pick them up from the wedding, and we thought that would be a little bit weird.
Yeah.
My ex-wife coming to my next wedding in the series.
Yeah, but you very much, I mean, again, as a wedding guest, you know, we were all very aware, you know, we were anyway, because we're friends of yours, but during the ceremony we were very aware that this was an honouring of the journey that you'd both been on to come to that point of sort of declaring your love and the union. And so there was a very much a feeling that yes, your ex-wives were involved, Eddie, because you know your children were there. So and it was all about that sort of journey and coming together. Yeah. Although it wasn't explicit, I very much got the sense that this is 2 families and the components of those families coming together in this beautiful day and this beautiful ceremony. So I very much felt that, and I think it came through most strongly when your children stood up and you know, there wasn't, I can vouch for the fact that there wasn't a dry eye. I mean, people were just sobbing their hearts out because it was so beautiful. In you know, your boys are only, I know they're teenagers now, but they're young lads. So to stand up and give such sort of heartfelt, emotional speeches, I thought was amazing, absolutely
Yeah.
fabulous.
And also testament to Ed's ex-wives, that their kids were happy to stand up and be so happy and embracing, because they haven't been drip poison. You know, it's all been very, very nice, hasn't it? And, you know, they were very supportive of the fact that the kids were coming to the wedding, and, you know, I mean, they don't speak to each other. You know, it's not like they went for coffee together and had this discussion, but they've both been really, really good, haven't they? You know, and the kids were very warmly accepting of the fact that we were getting married, and they were looking forward to having a great big party. So it was all good. It was all really good. And I think you're right, that shone through in everything that any of them did. That they were happy to be there, and it was a good day for them.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. So you got married, it's fairly recently. It was only a few months ago that we celebrated your wedding. But looking back on the day, so I'm laughing because I know the answer. But looking back on your day, would you say that there were any moments in particular that you will remember forever?
well,
so I'm going to take you back to last April, and I was awoken at 2:00 in the morning. and Ellie said, you're awake, darling. Why are you awake? I said, well, I've been rewriting the music to One Day More, Les Miserables. I don't know if any of your listeners are familiar with Les Miserables, the musical, but there's a big song called One Day More in that, which ends on a big crescendo, and it's the type of song in a musical where different cast members join in progressively throughout the hit. And he rewrote it and changed the name from One Day More to One Wife More. And it basically was a piss take on me and my history of marriages, but it was great. I mean, it was a brilliantly written new rendition, and it worked as a flash mob, and that's what we decided to do. So at the end of the ceremony, we'd sign the register, and the final reading, and the cast members of this flash mob were Ellie's friends. Ellie likes a bit of musical theatre, and lots of her friends similarly like showing off on stage. So we had, the guy came forward. Everybody thought he was going to do a reading. We had the Les Miserables music come on, and it became this flash mob.
Dave came along and said,
"Wow!"
And people just kept.
How many cast members?
About 11, I think,
11,
and
so
including all three of my siblings as well.
Yeah.
So they hadn't. One lives in Barcelona, two are in London. So they'd actually, my sister and my brother had come up especially a couple of days earlier. My brother had even left his family down in London and come up for the rehearsal. And I mean, they were up for it, even though. Like, my sisters are both quite theatrical. Emily, the one that lives in Barcelona, has known Les Mis since she was about 11 and knows it back to front. And so she was absolutely delighted to be part of it. Whereas Mary's an actress anyway, so she totally nailed it. I think, did she have a baby on strapped to her at the time? I don't think she did. When like babies roaming around. And Tom, I mean, he's like, he does sing in a choir, but he's not really a show off in any way, is he? He's very political.
He's the only one who hadn't rehearsed.
Prep Dave, what was it? Ed Miliband, who used to be Ed Miliband's right hand man, and prep him for PMQs. He's very straight, very straight, but he was totally up for it. So it was all good. You know, everybody just kind of had a.
And we have video.
We all felt that.
We have
it's on YouTube.
Oh, I need to go and check that out. That sounds too good to miss. Yeah.
Well, the thing was that
link is going in. That link's going in, Ross.
Yeah. The thing was that my friend Gayanne, who was doing a reading, and I'd love to mention Gayanne, Sarah, and Katie, who Katie was our celebrant, and she's not really a celebrant; she's a voiceover. Although now she's training to become a celebrant because she loved it so much. But she was just brilliant. She was so funny, and so she just nailed the tone of the thing so well. I mean, she has a lot in common with both of us because she's been married twice and also widowed. You know, what the first wedding sadly ended up in being widowed. So she and I had a lot in common. Now she's got a lot in common with you, so we get on with her very well. But she just did it so well with a kind of a really wicked sense of humour. But Sarah did a beautiful reading about love. And then Gayanne was really worried because she'd written a limerick as a joke and sent it to me on text. I said, well, will you both do a reading? And so Sarah said, oh yes, I've got this really beautiful Mary Oliver poem, and oh yeah, that's so romantic. Oh yeah, lovely. And then Gayanne, I can't remember exactly what the limerick was, but it was something like, there once was a girl with one tit who was sat on her own for a bit. Then she met Mr. Ed, who's a stallion in bed, and now her life's no longer shit. And we were like, that's hilarious. Do that. Anyway, the day before, she was speaking to a few of our friends who were all in the flash mob going, I don't think it's a good idea. I'm really worried about it. I just think it's just going to be so offensive to the parents. And all the people in the flash mob were like, I don't think it's going to be the worst thing that you'll hear in the ceremony. I don't think you need to worry. Because in the flash mob, the language was quite fruity at times, wasn't it? I mean, it wasn't bad. There were no F's and C's or anything, but there were twats.
There were a few. I think there was definitely
F.
some colourful language in your lyrics.
There was a twat here and there. But,
oh well, that's
fine. What's amongst friends? I'm trying to.
I mean, the thing was that we'd set the tone for the whole wedding with the invitations, hadn't we? Because we decided to call it Mrs. on the save the date. It was Mrs. Gardner 3. We did a save the date.
So we did a save the dates that came out quite soon after. In fact, you did it while we were eating pizza still in Dubrovnik.
I think so.
So this was literally pretty much the day after the proposal. And we were having lunch in the old town, and then she presented me with her phone and says, here's our invitation, darling.
We discussed it.
I love it.
Because I'd taken a picture of you next to it in front of a cannon, and it the cannon looked like it was a massive cock. So we put it like an old film poster. It said Mrs. Gardner 3, the saga continues. But at the top we put from the creators of 4 weddings and a funeral. And between us we had 4 weddings and a funeral. Or have we had?
Have now.
We have now. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So we it was always going to be. It was never going to be
very tongue-in-cheek.
Boring, was it?
Yeah, and I think that's a secret that I would recommend to anybody. You don't take it too seriously. Weddings can be a bit stiff and therefore stifling. If you throw in some humour and a bit of silliness, do it your way as well. You know, I think that if it's your day, you're the ones that are paying for it. Well, I mean, I know that sometimes people's parents do pay for it. Ours definitely didn't. But you know, I think some people are under pressure to do it their way. But if it's your day and you want to do it your way, do it, because we loved every minute of it. And there were things that I remember being so worried about whether it was going to rain before the wedding, because the venue, it was on a farm up the road from where we live, and it is a wedding venue, but it's a farm, a working farm, and it doesn't really lend itself well to terrible weather, even though it's in Bolton and you would imagine the weather to be pretty awful all the time up here. But we'd had 4 months of drought, to the point where all the reservoirs were empty. It started to rain the day before our wedding and it hasn't stopped since. No. But it didn't matter. You know, it didn't rain when we were getting out of the car. It only mattered in a few days building up to our wedding, when we were worried about ourselves, and we were checking weather apps every day and thinking, this is, you know, we've been, every couple approaches a wedding day hoping and praying that the weather is going to be good. But when it turned out, it was pissing it down all weekend, and on the the Friday and the Saturday.
So we said, the main thing is that it doesn't rain on the Friday, but in the end it was worse on the Friday. But even a friend of mine texted me in the morning and said it was brilliant because it brought out the Dunkirk spirit in everybody. And we didn't do the biggest walk that we were going to do. We didn't do the 10k that we were planning, but I think most people didn't care. Most people were really happy to stop at the village hall and stay there and get pissed. So that was all fine. So that was it was, everything was great, and it didn't matter that it rained. It almost made it funny.
There was one part of the day on the Saturday that actually wasn't raining, and for me it was the top of my list for not being for being dry, and it's when we arrived. So when we arrived, so everybody got there for, I don't know what time it was, 2:00 or so, and I started getting on the cocktails that we'd laid on, and we arrived together, but a little bit afterwards,
but separately, because your daughter drove you in her car.
So my daughter drove me and my 2 little ones in her car, her little white Peugeot, which were decked out in the wedding ribbons. So she drove us, and right behind us was Ellie, driven by one of the twins. And so we both arrived at the same time, and then got involved in the drinking. So it wasn't when we the ceremony. I wasn't there waiting at the altar for you to show up, looking at my watch. Is she going to show up? I'd arrived with her.
Yeah.
So that was brilliant, because it wasn't raining, and we had those camera shots of us arriving together and seeing our friends and with our children, and I even got two of my ushers to get in the car to drive them around to the car park around the back. So that worked out really well, actually. It was not.
But you mentioned the weather, and is it going to rain on our wedding day? Ross, as a wedding photographer, I think you'll vouch for the fact that it is a huge concern for many people. Is it going to rain? Is it going to rain? But those little camera phone photos that people took the day before your wedding, where you had all of the wedding guests together for your combined stag hen do, where they were trying to negotiate
a raging torrent.
Yeah. Rivers of muddy rainwater that were flowing through the forest that you were trying to walk through, and just like people on other people's backs, being picked across the water. And then when I arrived, this huge story about how the celebrant, it was one of those Chinese whisper stories, because she'd slipped and fallen in the water, and when I arrived, people were telling me that she'd broken her arm. And then she rocked up with a little bit of a bruise on her.
Yeah. The best thing was she'd nicked a glass of wine taken her glass of wine with her from the pub, and the glass of wine remained intact as she fell.
It was Alex, your son, who was carrying her over that body.
That's right. Yeah, he wasn't very good.
Yeah. Wasn't so great at that role. But I mean, I think the point being that very often those more sort of challenging conditions actually lead to more interesting memories, entertaining photography, dramatic photography. I mean, some of your most beautiful wedding photos, Ross, are when there's that sort of real drama going on in the sky. Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. People have got this idea that a sunny day is what makes a wedding, and it's far, far from it. And by the sound of your wedding, it's people's attitudes. And I always say people get their attitudes from the couple getting married. So obviously you were quite chilled and wanted fun, so everyone took their cue from you, and everyone joined in with the fun, just got stuck into the drink by the sound of it.
This is true. And actually, I remember we had a Zoom call with Stephanie and Deb, our DJs, before we had the wedding, and I said, I'm a bit worried, there's only 80 people coming, and is that going to be enough? When you take away the parents and the small children, that's not going to be many people on the dance floor. And Steph was like, it doesn't, you can have 2 people on a dance floor, they're going to be having a great time. And actually, I think because there were few people there, and the weather was bad, there was nobody outside at the fire pit or any of the things that they could have been doing. Everybody was indoors, and everybody that did stay had a really good time. So I don't think it matters. You don't have to have more than, you can have whatever number you want, but if people are up for it, which they will be because they've had a great day, it doesn't actually matter at all, does it?
No, it doesn't. And just going back to the photography thing, our brief to the photographer was more around reportage, capture people naturally having fun and interacting with each other, rather than posing for photographs. And that worked very well. And it, obviously when it's chucking it down, that sort of brief works quite well, because even during those small periods of time where it wasn't pissing down, the photographer did get us outside, and we were that, and I felt a bit windy and a bit wet.
Yeah, it was actually a bit annoying.
And
I think as well, because we knew we've got some really beautiful photos from when we actually got married officially.
Oh God, it was
and we really have got some stuff. And they were just iPhone photos taken by the girl that works there, but they were really nice photos of the two of us kind of grinning at each other, drinking champagne. So we actually didn't feel the need for any sort of staged wedding photos of our own, because we knew we already had some. So we just wanted to get the guests and the llamas. Where we got married, there were llamas and donkeys and other animals and things. So and actually
animals are available.
I know. Sorry.
So would there be anything at all? I think I know the answer, but would there be anything that you would do differently or change if you got married again to each other? I'll add that in.
Give me ideas.
He's got 9 years and 10 months to plan the next one, have you?
Yeah,
something like
that. Do you know what? I wouldn't change anything, and it's very easy to say that, but you do look back in hindsight because it was a it was a year in the making, and the thing that I focused on was actually the soundtrack, because I travel to London every week, and so I'm sat on a train. I don't read because I get travel sick, so I listen to podcasts and Spotify, and that's what I do. And so I was able to think through the entire day and the different phases of the weekend, and plan the soundtrack for it. And that was my bit, and that worked out very well actually. But it allowed you to be creative in your areas. That so the balance that we had was brilliant. We weren't tripping over each other. We naturally found the parts of the wedding weekend that we were tuned to. Well,
we sat there usually on a Friday night when we have Ed's children, usually Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So on Friday night it was our night, and we'd sit around the fire pit at home and just throw ideas around, and it was nice actually, just planning the wedding. It
worked out remarkably well actually. I mean, you could say the things that you can't control, like the weather, and you could say that it was difficult to get your guest list down to a level that was the right balance, because there's always people who don't quite make the cut, and you do feel a bit guilty. We were very lucky that there were incredibly few people who weren't able to make it. I mean, if anyone,
I don't think there's only one couple that I can think of that couldn't make it, and they were relatives, and they booked a holiday.
That's right.
So they couldn't come, but kind of there were a couple of friends, weren't there? Like a friend's wife couldn't come, which was really disappointing. It was kind of only a week before some work thing came up, but in the end actually it wasn't as bad a problem as we would have loved to have seen her, but in the end my son's girlfriend could come, and he kind of needed her to be there, and I think that she felt like she wanted to be there, so it actually opened up a place for her, because we sort of said from the start, look, if you're in a relationship with somebody for 6 months, then you can bring them to the wedding, but if you've just started dating somebody, then you can't, and they were just kind of not quite there, but she'd been long-term enough for to be invited. I mean, split up now obviously.
That's the thing. That's something I've learned from all my weddings so far. Is that the seating plan is never static, and as you approach the day itself, that's where you get people who obviously can't make it, and then sometimes it's quite a dramatic change that you need to make, even 2 or 3 days before your wedding. They can't come, and in which case, if they can't come, that completely changes the dynamic. Because some of our tables were tables of 6, and you can't just have 4 people on the table. So we have to change it around, and that was actually the most frantic element,
thing, wasn't it?
Certainly leading up, the days leading up to the wedding weekend, that probably consumed most amount of our activity, is rearranging the table plans.
And in fact, something that we had done to start with was that we thought, they will really get on. I'd love them to meet them. So why don't we put them on a table together? And so we tried to mix it up quite a lot so that people were with people they didn't know, and we wanted them to get to know each other. And then the 11th hour, we thought, you know what, people will make friends with each other anyway. If they, people tend to gravitate towards their own kind. But actually, we wanted the people that, like we put you with Anne Claire, I think, and a few people that we knew that you just would have wanted to see, because you haven't seen them for ages or whatever. So we actually, in the end, we put our friends with their friends, and I think that worked really well, because we knew then that they would have a great time, and again, they did.
People had bonded so much the day before and the night before, and I came very late to the ceremony to the event on the
Friday
day before, and I walked in, and people who'd never met before were, they were best buddies. They'd had this amazing experience of walking through challenging conditions, and helping each other out, and breaking up.
Some of them were in the bar doing shots at about 2 a.m. So we were told. Very jealous.
Very jealous. I know. we were not.
Is that you?
No, I was safely tucked up in bed, being very responsible.
Okay. I have to say at this point, by the way, that if he's listening, my best man was absolutely superb, not just in how he looked after me, but the speech
you had
that
two best
he
men,
gave. I had two best men, and they divided their jobs. So one of them was in charge of the sort of the stag do, the walk, and he gave a great introduction and welcome, and talked about how it was going to work out. And then on the second day, the best man did the best man's speech, which was quite easily the best man speech that I've ever had.
Third time lucky.
I think it's the best
one
man
I've
speech
ever
that
heard,
anyone
I
has
have to
ever
say.
heard.
Yeah,
Everyone
it generally was.
Cannot stop talking about it.
It really was.
Thank you.
Quite
Well, full disclosure, the best man is my husband.
Okay.
And you would expect he is a BAFTA-winning comedy writer. So so
we had high hopes.
It's the only reason why I chose.
I was going to say we don't even like him.
I think he felt the pressure. He definitely felt the pressure.
I bet he did. I felt really sorry for him, actually. It must have been quite a. Well, I know.
No, he doesn't, and he was brilliant, and the entire wedding party was superb.
They were. What I loved about your best men was that they both came down the aisle holding hands and a bunch of flowers.
We gave them a big cake to hold.
And they did. They just did whatever we asked.
They did. Smile.
And my
They're
two
very
dear
close.
friends and Fanny, they came down. They were my bridesmaids, and they came down holding hands with a bunch of flowers, which is all right because they were girls, so that's allowed. But I think these these two burly blokes.
We got about 3 or 4 months before the wedding. We got my two best men and your two bridesmaids. They came over for a dinner party where we planned. And actually, what we did, we overplanned. We said we'd like to do this. We'd like to play a game on the Friday night, and if it rains, we ought to do this. And we had so many ideas, but the guidance they gave us was, you don't need to do anything. You've got your
Everyone
friends and your family in a room. Even if it's chucking it down out there, they'll get on. It'll be brilliant. And they were right.
They were totally right. Yeah,
Absolutely
you can
right.
over-engineer things, can't you? You can have too many silly games. You don't need silly games at all. You just need people who, you need a guest list of people who are up for a laugh and good conversation list anyway.
No, that's lovely.
No regrets.
Lovely.
No regrets.
So if I mean, I know it is very difficult because there are so many elements to a wedding day, and you obviously did yours in quite a different way. Partly because you had a secret wedding, but you did do it in quite a different way. Is there any particular piece of advice? I mean, I think you might have just given it there, that particular piece of advice that you would give to other couples that are planning a wedding similar to yours, in as much as you have that blended family situation, you've been married before, perhaps widowed. Is there any piece of advice that you would give for people who are planning those kinds of weddings? In a similar situation to yourselves?
I think from my point of view, just try to enjoy it. Try to visualize the fact that the people are going to come. Why are you inviting this person? Do they bring you joy? And we actually said that we asked Katie to say that in her welcome speech, didn't we? Which is to everybody that was invited to our wedding. I was going to say family aside, but that's not fair. They happen to bring us joy too. But everybody that came to our wedding was invited because they make us feel good, and we knew that they would bring something to the day. So we didn't invite anybody that we had to invite. It was just a joyous, I don't know, just the joyous day that we wanted. Is that?
It was, yeah. And I think so. What I learned was the stressful bit, as we've said, was getting the guest list done. And that happens at the start, and it is stressful because there are people that you want to invite but probably cannot. So, clearly you can't invite everybody. There are restrictions, but build your guest list and then move on. Don't second guess. Don't go back. Don't revisit it.
It's easy for
Make
him
the
to say
decision.
because he's got a set group of friends that he's had for 30 years. I've just got all these kind of friends that I keep picking up, but
once we'd committed to it,
I know.
and you cried a bit because you couldn't invite.
Yeah,
Auntie
because
Joyce or her.
you ended up adding about 6 people, and I ended up with 6 people taken off.
But at the point that we then said, right,
Let's have a row, aren't we?
the spreadsheet is now locked. You were much happier. We could then.
Yeah, I think once we
stop
decided
worrying.
we were.
Because
Yeah,
that is pretty much.
I still feel
the
bad
most
about certain
stressful,
people
the
not
most
invited.
difficult part of a wedding is who to invite and who not to invite.
Mm.
Yeah.
But
Do it and
actually,
then move on.
I think it's easier not to invite certain family members, because if you say, look, we are just inviting siblings or whatever, or people, no further out than siblings, people go, yeah, I totally get that. I get it, no problem. Because I'm quite close to my cousin. And that was one of the people that Alex said, oh, you've got to invite Kate. Well, I'd love to invite Kate, but the problem is if I invite Kate, I've got to invite them and them and them, so, and Kate was fine. She was like, it's your wedding, you do what you want.
Yeah.
Did you have anyone that wasn't fine, or you worried that wouldn't be fine?
There's a few we worried
people
about.
I
wouldn't be
haven't
fine.
heard from since we got married, and
Oh, really?
you would think that they would have commented on the Facebook.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, they're not proper friends then.
Well,
Ellie.
yeah, maybe.
That's the risk you run, and that's why it's quite stressful.
Mm.
But you build your list according to who you want to be there on the day. I don't think you should be forced, apart from family members, but you shouldn't
even then,
feel
you shouldn't
compelled to
feel
have people
have
just
to.
because they're part of your circle of friends. They're there to, this is the most important day of your life, really. You want to remember it for all the right reasons, and one person can change the ambience of the whole day. So choose very carefully and be decisive, and then move on and get on with enjoying the planning.
Great advice. Great advice.
Amazing.
Yeah, invite people who bring you joy. I like that very, very much.
Yeah.
Well, it was a
Almost
wonderful
like he's done
day.
this before. I mean, I have to say, I am the third. I've been the third wife twice. They're always 48 and twice divorced when I meet them.
Wow.
So the next time I'm
So
going to
far.
snare one from a nursing home, aren't
I like the formula. Guys, thank you so much for
Yes,
talking.
thank you.
Really,
Oh,
really
thank you.
appreciate
It's been a
it.
pleasure.
Thank you.
And can I say how happy I was with my hair accessories as well, please? Because and in fact, that's the only
No,
disappointment
we'll
I've
cut
got
that
with
bit
the
out. Don't worry, I'll cut that bit out.
Sorry, Ross.
only disappointment I've got with the photographer, because she kept taking photos at the other angle, and I deliberately stood at it like in front of the altar so that everybody could see my hair accessories, and she stood behind me.
You were around the other
So,
side.
disappointing.
They were
But
amazing.
they were amazing.
They were beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank
really
you.
have-
Cut it
you
out,
have
Ross.
a
Cut it out.
talent.
Thank you so much. Absolutely wonderful. And thank you. And it will
you.
go out, and I'm sure, I mean, there's tons of really, really good advice in there, but that's going to be really valuable to other people that are planning weddings that have got similarly unique blended families. So thanks ever so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Lovely to meet you. Thank
Lovely to
you.
meet you
Take
too.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.